Dates in this article are given in the Gregorian calendar, then 10 days ahead of the Julian calendar in use in England. The First Anglo-Dutch War was a conflict fought entirely at sea between the navies of the Commonwealth of England and the United Provinces of the Netherlands. Caused by disputes over trade, the war began with English attacks on Dutch merchant shipping, but expanded to vast fleet actions. Ultimately, it resulted in the English Navy gaining control of the seas around England, and forced the Dutch to accept an English monopoly on trade with England and her colonies. It was the first of the Anglo-Dutch Wars. Background: in the 16th century, England and the Netherlands had been close allies against the ambitions of the Habsburgs. They cooperated in fighting the Spanish Armada. England supported the Dutch in the 80 Years' War by sending money and troops. There was a permanent English representative in the Dutch government to ensure coordination of the joint war effort. The separate peace in 1604 between England and Spain strained this relationship. The weakening of Spanish power at the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648 also meant that many colonial possessions of the Portuguese and some of the Spanish Empire and the mineral resources were effectively up for grabs. The ensuing rush for empire brought the former allies into conflict. Also, the Dutch, having made peace with Spain, quickly replaced the English as dominant traders with the Iberian Peninsula, adding to an English resentment about Dutch trade that had steadily grown since 1590. By the middle of the 17th century, the Dutch had built by far the largest mercantile fleet in Europe, with more ships than all the other states combined, and their economy, based mainly on maritime commerce, gave them a dominant position in European trade, especially in the North Sea and Baltic. Furthermore, they had conquered most of Portugal's territories and trading posts in the East Indies and Brazil, giving them control over the enormously profitable trade in spices. They were even gaining significant influence over England's trade with her as yet small North American colonies. The trading and shipping disparity between England and the Dutch United Provinces was growing. First, because the English shipping and trading system was based on duties and tariffs, while the Dutch trading system was based on free trade without tariffs and duties. Thus, Dutch products would be less expensive and more competitive on the world market than English products. For example, an English wool trader, who dealt largely with ports in English-speaking America, complained in 1651 that although his English ships would take wool cloth to America to be sold, they could expect to leave American ports with 4,000 to 5,000 bags of wool cloth unsold. Dutch ships, on the other hand, would leave American ports with barely 1,000 bags of wool cloth unsold. Because of this disparity, English trade with her traditional markets in the Baltic, Germany, Russia, and Scandinavia withered. A second cause of the Dutch advantage in shipping and trading in the mid-1600s was the end of the 30 Years' War, which, from the Dutch point of view, was the end of the 80 Years' War for Dutch independence from Spain. The end of the war meant a lifting of the Spanish embargoes of the Dutch coast and Dutch shipping. This translated into cheaper prices for Dutch products due to a steep and sustained drop in Dutch freight charges and Dutch marine insurance rates. Furthermore, with normalized relations between Spain and the Dutch United Provinces, trade between the two countries resumed almost immediately. Meanwhile, English trade with Spain was still limited. By 1651, England was in an economic slump. The third cause of the Dutch trading advantage was the English Civil War. In 1649, Parliament overthrew the monarchy and beheaded King Charles I. Until 1651, the English Parliament remained at war with Royalists both at home and in some of England's colonies. From 1649 to 1651, Parliament in London set about expanding and improving the English navy to pursue the Civil War at sea. Meanwhile, the war raised havoc with English trading and shipping. The English accused the Dutch of profiting from the turmoil of the English Civil War. With their victory over the Spanish fleet at the Battle of the Downs on October 21, 1639, Dutch confidence in their naval abilities grew to such a degree that after peace was made with Spain in 1648, they allowed their navy to deteriorate greatly. The Dutch navy had 5 autonomous admiralties. After 1648, these colleges sold off many of their ships. One of the ships sold was Dutch Admiral Martin Tromp's own flagship, the Emilia, of 600 tons and fitted with 57 guns. Admiral Tromp was forced to take up the 600-ton Brederode with its 54 guns as his flagship. By the onset of this First Anglo-Dutch War in 1652, the Dutch Navy had only 79 ships at its disposal. Furthermore, many of these ships were in bad repair, so that fewer than 50 ships were seaworthy. The deficiency in the Dutch Navy was to be made good by arming merchantmen. All were inferior in firepower to the largest English first and second rates. On the other hand, the navy of the Commonwealth of England was in better condition initially and was constantly improving. The Commonwealth had won the English Civil War in 1652 with a strong and effective navy that had supported and supplied Cromwell's army in the wars in Scotland and Ireland, blockaded the royalist fleet of Prince Rupert in Lisbon, and organised a system of convoys to protect the commerce of the Commonwealth against the swarms of privateers set upon it from every European port. On the 24th of September 1650, General at Sea Robert Blake had defeated the Portuguese fleet in a violent gale, sinking the Portuguese vice-admiral and taking 7 prizes, compelling Portugal to cease protecting Rupert. In 1651 the royalist strongholds in the Isles of Scilly, the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands had been captured, and in 1652 General George Askew had recovered England's colonial possessions in the West Indies and North America. The English navy had been placed on a secure financial footing by an act of 10 November 1650, which imposed a 15% tax on merchant shipping and provided that the money thus raised should be used to fund the naval forces protecting the convoys. Between 1649 and 1651, the English Parliament considerably expanded and improved the British Navy. Dutch Admiral Tromp's new flagship Brederode was the largest ship in the Dutch Navy. Britain had 18 ships superior in firepower to the Brederode. Furthermore, not only were the British ships larger, with more guns, but the British guns themselves were bigger than the guns of the Dutch Navy. The British could thus fire and hit enemy ships at a longer distance, causing comparatively more damage with their shot. Political tensions between the Commonwealth and the Republic. During the English Civil War, the Dutch stadtholder Frederick Henry had given major financial support to Charles I of England, to whom he had close family ties, and had often been on the brink of intervening with his powerful army. When Charles was beheaded, the Dutch were outraged by the regicide. As a consequence, Oliver Cromwell considered the Dutch Republic as an enemy. Nevertheless, the Commonwealth and the Dutch Republic had many things in common. They were both Republican and Protestant. After the death of Frederick Henry, his son, Stadtholder William II of Orange, tried to fulfill the monarchical aspirations his late father had always fostered by establishing a military dictatorship. The States of Holland then made overtures to Cromwell, seeking his support against William, suggesting vaguely that the province of Holland might join the Commonwealth. The Navigation Act passed by British Parliament in 1651 limited Dutch trade with any of the British colonies in America unless the shipping was done in British bottoms, British ships. Indeed, any shipping coming into British ports or the ports of British colonies from anywhere in the world was required to be carried in British ships. Furthermore, the Navigation Act forbade all trade with those British colonies that retained connections and sympathy for the royalist cause of Charles I. Acceptance of the terms of the Navigation Act was seen by the Dutch as subordinating Dutch trade to the British trading system. This insulted Dutch pride and damaged their economy. But the true cause of the war was the actions of the English navy and privateers against Dutch shipping. In 1651, 140 Dutch merchantmen were seized on the open seas. During January 1652 alone, another 30 Dutch ships were captured at sea and taken to English ports. Protests to England by the States General of the United Provinces were of no avail. The English Parliament showed no inclination toward curbing these seizures of Dutch shipping. The English delegation to The Hague, on November 6, 1650, the stadtholder of the United Provinces, William II, died suddenly. He had been a popular prince from the royal House of Orange when he was elected stadtholder in 1647. The political faction identified most closely with the idea of rule by the States General rather than by Orangist princes like William II. The States Party was especially powerful in the large commercially oriented province of Holland. To obtain support against William II, the States Party of the province of Holland had sought support from Oliver Cromwell. Now with William II dead, the States Party was in a much stronger position politically, and there was no longer any real need for Cromwell's support against the stadtholderate. When on 28 January 1651 the States General officially recognized the Commonwealth, they fully expected this to solve all the problems between the two countries. To their enormous embarrassment, however, on 7 March 1651 a delegation of 246 from Cromwell arrived in The Hague, headed by Oliver St. John, to negotiate the conditions under which the Dutch Republic might unite itself with England, as Scotland was united with England. Cromwell had taken the earlier suggestions of a merger of England and Holland far too seriously. In an attempt at politeness, the English delegation left it to the Dutch to produce the first proposals. The Dutch were too stunned and confused for a coherent reaction. After a month of deadlock, the English delegation disclosed a plan by Cromwell to divide the world into two spheres of influence. The Dutch could control Africa and Asia. In return, they would assist the English in conquering both Americas from the Spanish. Cromwell hoped that in this way the colonial rivalry would be eased by giving the English their own profitable empire. But the Dutch saw it as an absurd grandiose scheme, which offered them little hope for profit but the certainty of much expense and a new war in the Spanish-held southern Netherlands. After much deliberation by the delegates of the 7 provinces, on 24 June they made a counter-proposal of 36 articles, which they hoped would be agreeable to the English without involving themselves in a war for world conquest. This proposal was in essence a free trade agreement. Nothing could have angered the English delegation more. It was precisely the fact that the English were unable to compete with the Dutch under conditions of free trade that lay at the heart of the conflict between them. They interpreted the counter-proposal as a deliberate affront. Meanwhile, other events had convinced the British delegation of Dutch animosity. The Hague was the residence of the young widow of William II, Charles I's daughter Mary Henrietta Stuart, the Princess Royal. Because of her presence there, those English noblemen in exile not fighting with her brother Charles in Scotland had mostly gathered in The Hague, turning the town into a royalist bulwark. Also, The Hague had been for many years an Orangist stronghold. The delegation members, all supporters of Cromwell's Commonwealth, could only leave their lodgings under armed escort, for fear of being assaulted by royalists or large Orangist mobs of Dutch townsmen in the pay of the royalists. At the same time, no aid could be expected from the states of Holland and West Friesland, who feared open revolt if they tried to restore order between the English factions. Deeply disappointed, the English delegates left for England in the last week of June, reporting that the Dutch were untrustworthy and that the United Provinces were under the control of the Orangist party and thus of threat to the security of the Commonwealth. Outbreak of war. French support for the English royalists had led the Commonwealth to issue letters of marque against French ships and against French goods in neutral ships. These letters carried the right to search neutral ships, and most neutral ships sailing the seas were Dutch. Infuriated by the treatment of the English delegation in The Hague and emboldened by their victory against Charles I and the Royalist forces at the Battle of Worcester on September 3, 1651, the English Parliament, as noted above, passed the first of the Navigation Acts in October 1651. It ordered that only English ships and ships from the originating country could import goods to England. This measure, as also noted above, was particularly aimed at hampering the shipping of the highly trade-dependent Dutch and often used as a pretext simply to take their ships. As General Monk put it, "The Dutch have too much trade, and the English are resolved to take it from them." Agitation among the Dutch merchants was further increased by George Iscu's capture in early 1652 of 27 Dutch ships trading with the royalist colony of Barbados in contravention of an embargo imposed by the Commonwealth. Over 100 other Dutch ships were captured by English privateers between October 1651 and July 1652. Moreover, the death of Dutch stadtholder William II, who had favoured an expansion of the army at the expense of the navy, had led to a change in the defence policy of the United Provinces towards protecting the great trading concerns of Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Accordingly, the States General decided on 3 March 1652 to expand the fleet by hiring and equipping 150 merchant ships as ships of war to allow effective convoying against hostile English actions. The news of this decision reached London on 12 March 1652 and the Commonwealth too began to prepare for war, but as both nations were unready, war might have been delayed if not for an unfortunate encounter between the fleets of Dutch Lieutenant Admiral Martin Tromp and General at Sea Robert Blake in the English Channel near Dover on 29 May 1652. An ordinance of Cromwell required all foreign fleets in the North Sea or the Channel to dip their flag in salute, reviving an ancient right the English had long insisted on, but when Tromp was tardy to comply, Blake opened fire, starting the brief Battle of Goodwin Sands. Tromp lost 2 ships but escorted his convoy to safety.